Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Folks, we've got a big problem with the Supreme Court, and the dismantling of abortion rights is really just the beginning. The court has gone rogue, imposing an eye-watering ideological agenda at breakneck speed with nothing restraining it whatsoever. The court of judicial modesty that Chief Justice Roberts supposedly attempted to lead is dead. In that court, the goal was to push up against the bounds of public acceptance, notching conservative wins, but never completely overturning the apple cart. Any notion that the court would be restrained by concerns over its own legitimacy, that's also history. The Roe decision is stunningly unpopular and, of course, flies in the face of respect for long-held precedent. But the ideologues with the majority on this court have an agenda, and they don't really care about anything other than enacting it. We're actually still waiting on what might ultimately be the most damaging decision of this term. The court is likely to block the Environmental Protection Agency from setting limits on carbon emissions pursuant to the Clean Air Act, devastating our ability to address the climate crisis in anything approaching a meaningful way. The impact of the decisions of this court, they're going to reverberate for generations, locking in corporate power, blocking new programs to benefit the working class, locking in dramatically unpopular culture war victories, as in the case of guns and abortion, and generally making it impossible to govern at a time when the country desperately needs some governing. The basic problem is this. The idealized notion of the Supreme Court is that it serves as an institutional guardian of every American's rights, a body which is intentionally removed from the whims of the majority so it can more readily protect the rights of the minority when called upon to do so. But the current court does not serve this purpose at all. Instead, it is a political weapon of last resort for enshrining political victories which would not be possible at the ballot box, the culmination of a multi-decade political project to accomplish exactly that. Conservatives have lost the public debate on guns and abortion and climate and unions and gay rights, but with control of the court, they can still wield immense power on all of those issues. Public will be damned. Now, add to this picture the anti-democratic nature of the Senate via rural state power, the House via gerrymandering, the Electoral College via just sheer bizarre stupidity, and state houses also via gerrymandering and disproportionate rural power, and you do have a real crisis of democracy on your hands. Now, the court's problems are much deeper than this moment, however. In fact, the court's current regressive and reactionary posture is really quite consistent with how it's behaved for much of its history. At multiple times in American history, presidents have been forced to check the court's power through threats, or by reforming the court, or just by straight up ignoring their terrible rulings in order to restore some balance to our democracy. Without periodically beating back the power of the court, unaccountable justices routinely spin out horrendous decisions. Just think about Dred Scott, which said black people had, quote, no rights which the white man was bound to respect, or Korematsu, which backed Japanese internment, Plessy v. Ferguson, which ended Reconstruction and ushered in Jim Crow, Citizens United, which opened the floodgates on legalized political bribery, or this latest decision, Dobbs, which will similarly go down in history as a black mark on the Supreme Court. So here is a little bit of that history. Under Abraham Lincoln, the court was so reactionary and racist that Lincoln literally just ignored them. In order to end slavery and uphold rights of black Americans, Lincoln and the Republican Party outright rejected the concept of judicial supremacy, arguing that it was ultimately up to the American people to interpret the meaning of the Constitution and the rights which it conferred. In his 1860 inaugural address, Lincoln declared, quote, if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the instant they are made, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal. According to Matt Karp at Jacobin, Lincoln and his allies then proceeded to pack the court, reorganize the judiciary, and blatantly reject the court's decisions, passing laws in direct contradiction to Dred Scott and the other pro-slavery precedents which the court had set. As Karp writes, it's no accident that, quote, the greatest democratic expansion in U.S. political history, the era of emancipation and Reconstruction, demanded a direct political attack on the power of the Supreme Court. And it's also no accident that as the court reasserted itself and grew in strength, the great promise of the Reconstruction era was aborted and the segregationist Jim Crow era began, kick-started by, of course, the court's decision in Plessy v. Ferguson. FDR was similarly forced into battle against the court in order to confront the crises of his time and secure some positive rights for the American people. The nation, of course, at that time was in danger of coming apart thanks to the Great Depression, but FDR faced a court so dominated by pro-corporate ideologues that they struck down a New York law limiting bakery work to 10 hours per day. They argued, I kid you not, that the law violated the rights of workers who wanted to labor more. This era, the so-called Lochner Court, named for that bakery decision, routinely struck down FDR's New Deal legislation that conferred material support and labor power to working-class Americans. Eventually, after the court narrowly ruled that the federal government could regulate labor relations, FDR effectively declared war on the court, telling the American people, quote, "In effect, 4 justices ruled that the right under a private contract to exact a pound of flesh was more sacred than the main objectives of the Constitution to establish an enduring nation. The court has been acting not as a judicial body, but as a policy-making body. We have therefore reached the point as a nation where we must take action to save the Constitution from the court and the court from itself." FDR's credible threat to pack the court, it worked. In the game of chicken, the overwhelmingly popular FDR won, setting the stage for the greatest era of American growth, labor power, and shared prosperity in this country's history. We are at a similar moment now. Justices are behaving like kings and queens, disregarding all but their personal political agendas. And the American people are clamoring for a Lincoln-style or FDR-style reckoning with this Supreme Court. Remember, even before the dramatically unpopular overturning of Roe, the court was already held in historically low regard. Only 25% of the country says they have confidence in the court, numbers which reflect the disgust of Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. What's more, Politico actually just polled a range of court reform ideas, and every single one, even the supposedly radical notion of packing the court, enjoys net support. Term limits are supported by 62% and opposed by only 23%, so that's a net support of plus 39. Court packing is at plus 7 net support. Age caps plus 35. A judicial code of ethics, which is insane they don't already have, is plus 54. Balancing the court with equal numbers of Dems, Republicans, and independents is plus 23. I would personally add one to that list. Impeach some justices. Several of these justices lied under oath to the public and to lawmakers in order to obtain their positions, knowingly hiding a secret agenda from public scrutiny. 2 senators, Manchin and Collins, a Democrat and a Republican, have both accused Justice Kavanaugh of lying to them about how he would rule on Roe. Collins has also accused Justice Gorsuch of the same, saying in a statement, quote, "This decision is inconsistent with what Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh said in their testimony and their meetings with me, where they both were insistent on the importance of supporting long-standing precedents that the country has relied upon." Now, I think everyone who believed these justices were complete fools, but that doesn't mean we should normalize letting justices lie under oath in order to obtain effectively unlimited power. We have a process in place for dealing with this kind of betrayal of the public trust, and it is called impeachment. Now, some of these ideas would, of course, require legislative action, which is only possible if you get rid of the filibuster. Some would require supermajority, which Democrats aren't anywhere near winning, since they love nothing more than to give up before they've even begun. But it's also worth noting from the history that in the case of FDR, it didn't even take actual reform, just the credible threat, in order for the court to get its act together. Let's learn from history and follow the examples of Lincoln and FDR. Let's put the court in its place in service of protecting our rights, rather than standing by as it uses its anti-democratic nature to lock in rule by the powerful. Reforming the court is the first step in retaking our democracy and making our country work again for the majority. And Sagar, I think a lot of the corporate cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.